Hello and welcome to Game 30 of Chess.com's Winter Classic Final. Leela is white, Stockfish is black, and they played the Budapest defense with e5. An opening that I personally don't really like, but hey, who am I to judge? Apparently, 20% of the games are black wins, so maybe it's not that bad. It's just that I don't get it. I mean, black gives up the e5 pawn and then tries to get it back. What kind of gambit is that? Usually what happens is that if white plays this correctly, then he will end up with an advantage, and sometimes he will even end up with a clean extra pawn. So let's see how this works. After white takes on e5, black usually plays knight g4 and tries to get it back, but sometimes black plays the crappy knight e4. He puts pressure on f2, d2 and c3, and hopes to trick white with moves like bishop b4 or queen h4. But if white plays this right, then black gets nothing, and this knight will be misplaced on e4 and will have to leave. But where? Because f6, where it would like to go, and d6 are taken away by the pawn. And if it goes to c5, then it runs into b4, and g5 is also not the happiest square for that knight. The move that I like here for white is simply a3. Take away b4 from the bishop, and this already solves at least half of white's problems. Black could continue now with knight c6, attacking e5, and white has to be careful not to defend it with f4. That would be running into black's trap because of queen h4. And after g3, black could take because the pawn is pinned to the rook. So that would be unfortunate, but white can play knight f3, and he's already threatening to play queen c2 and harass that knight. So what usually happens now is that black plays d6, trying to provoke white to take here so that the knight can return to f6, but white can ignore that and just simply play queen c2. And now the knight either goes to c5 and runs into b4 and gets harassed, or black plays d5, defending the knight, but then e5 is a clean extra pawn for white. It's very hard to see what black has in return. So as we can see, knight e4 is not very good, so that's why after the pawn takes on e5, black usually plays knight g4 and tries to get it back. The move I like here for white is bishop f4, sticking to the pawn, and also getting the bishop out before the knight would block it in. And similarly, black now plays bishop b4. In order to get back the e5 pawn, black will have to play queen e7 and attack it like this. So he gets the bishop out before the queen blocks it in. And in this position, black now has two moves. He can either play knight c3, as in the game, or knight d2. In this variation with knight d2, white gives back the e5 pawn, but in return he will get a completely risk-free position without any weaknesses and with the bishop pair. Black can continue now with knight c6, knight f3 and queen e7. White doesn't have an extra piece to defend the pawn, but he can play now a3, and the bishop will have to take the knight. But just before that, black can get tricky and play knight e5. Taking the bishop now would be a huge blunder because of the embarrassing knight d3 mate. So this should be avoided, and instead of taking the bishop, white should take the knight, and after black recaptures, simply play e3 and the bishop guards d3. If the bishop tries to avoid the exchange and plays bishop c5 or bishop a5, then the white pawns will hunt him down. And if he tries to be smart and goes to d6 in one shot, hoping for c6 and bishop c7, then black will be in a shock after knight e4. And he can't play c6 because white is attacking the bishop twice, and the white pawns are coming. So the bishop can't really run, and in this position he has to take the knight, queen recaptures, d6, bishop e2, castles, castles, and white has no weaknesses at all. He has the bishop pair, so the only one who can hope for something is white. So this was the calmer variation with knight d2. In the game, Leela chose to play knight c3 and tries to stick to the pawn. After bishop takes, pawn takes, knight c6, knight f3 and queen e7, white has the option to play queen d5 and defend the pawn. Now, black can't add another attacker to e5, and white is threatening to play h3 and drive away the knight. And he can't take on e5, he can't go to f6 either, and he definitely doesn't want to go to h6. So black plays now f6, attacking e5 once more. If now h3, then the knight could take on e5. But now Leela captures the pawn, and after the knight recaptures, queen d3. And white is a pawn up. Stockfish now played d6, a logical move allowing this bishop to come out, but it also controls e5. Leela now played g3, intending to fianchetto the bishop. She could play e3, queen c2 and bishop d3, but the bishop on d3 would be less well placed than on g2. First of all, it's blocked in by the c4 pawn, it could run into knight e5 stuff, and it would only control one central like square, whereas from g2 it would control two central like squares. But there are also other advantages. Since Leela has a pawn majority on the king side, she would like to move these pawns up the board, and then this bishop could be an extra defender for the king. And lastly, she would like to get in e4 in one move instead of baby stepping it, as it would be the case if she would develop the bishop to d3. Stockfish continued with castle, bishop g2, bishop g4, h3, bishop h5 and c5. This is another interesting move by Leela. She gives back a pawn, but this move has a lot of upsides. First of all, black was threatening bishop g6 and attacking the queen, and by playing c5, white gave herself more options. She could go to c4 with the queen, or even to b5 and attack b7. And after black takes on c5, this bishop now can attack c7. And also, since the pawn is no longer on d6, this pawn on e4 can march forward freely. Leela now castled, and Stockfish played rook e8, attacking e2. Now, since Leela wants to get in e4 at some point, it doesn't make sense to first play e3 and then e4. It's much better to just simply defend the pawn with rook e1 and try to get in e4 at some point. But now Stockfish played knight e4, and it looks like black has a firm grip on the e4 square, especially that the bishop can go to g6 and add further support. But it's amazing how one little move by Leela can destabilize Stockfish's position. She now played rook b1, attacking b7, and it's not so easy to defend because after b6, black loses a knight after queen check and taking the knight. So black has to find another way to defend b7. Rook b8 is not very attractive, so Stockfish played knight a5. But now the problem is that the knight doesn't control e5 and Leela jumps right in. And now she suddenly attacks this knight twice, so it has to move. And we can see how slowly e4 is becoming a reality. But playing e4 right now would be premature, and also bad would be to take on b7 with the bishop. In both cases, black would play g5 and one of these pieces would be lost. So instead of e4, Leela played queen f5. Her queen is not afraid to stare into the eyes of the black rook. Of course, if the knight would move away, then the bishop would be lost. And queen f5 is very effective. She's stopping g5 and it's also defending the knight. There followed b6, rook e1, rook d8, and now e3 instead of e4. Probably the idea is to control b7 and not allow this knight to reroute itself home. But after c6, Leela finally played e4, and after h6, g4, bishop e8, knight g6, attacking both the queen and the rook. So the bishop gives himself up, and Leela gets the bishop pair. And we'll see shortly what she can do with a pair of bishops. Stockfish now went for a queen exchange, and after takes, Leela played bishop h2, a move that maybe looks a bit weird, but it's very good. The idea is that she wants to play f4, but she couldn't play bishop e3 because it would drop the e4 pawn, and if she puts it on g3, then after rook d3 she can play f4. So it makes sense to put it on h2. And now after rook d3, she played f4, giving up the c3 pawn. Pawn quality is more important now than quantity, and her pawns are moving up the board pretty fast with tempo. g5, pawn takes, pushing back the knight to knight h7, h4, boxing in the knight, knight f8, h5, knight back, g6, creating a mating net for the black king, knight d8, rook d1, c4, and a4. Going after the a pawn would be a mistake now because of bishop d6 and black is losing. For example, rook a4, check, rook takes, bishop takes, and black loses a knight. So instead of that, Stockfish played rook b3, bishop d6, knight e6, and now a beautiful move, e5. Leela is tying down the black pieces. She's attacking c6, but the pawn can't really move because bishop d5 would be a very uncomfortable pin. So the knight is stuck defending c6, which means that this rook is also stuck because it doesn't have squares. Stockfish now played rook g3, and after king h2, rook g5, bishop f3 defending, Stockfish played b5, a move that Leela doesn't like at all, because after a takes and c takes, black gives up all these squares. And now Leela plays a move that was completely missed by Stockfish. He was expecting something like rook g1, king g1, knight f4, but Leela surprised him with bishop b4, giving up e5. So what's wrong with taking on e5? Well, after rook e1, apparently the best line for black is to lose a piece. After rook e1, now knight c7 getting out of the pin, rook takes, knight takes, and now after bishop a5, this knight is lost because it can't go to c6 or b7, and it cannot be defended, and if it comes to e6, then bishop d5 pins it, and you'll be lost. So rook e5 is not very good. So Stockfish, after bishop b4, preferred to play rook f5, and after king g3, king h8, and rook fe1, Leela is finally ready to invade the black position with rook d6 and bishop g4. So Stockfish thinks it's best time to give up the rook and seek for some activity with knight c6, bishop d6, knight cd4 check, king e4. Leela's king now enters the battle, which is no surprise at all since her king is the most attacking king I've ever seen. Knight b3, king d5, c3, and now rook d3. Leela now gives up the exchange in order to unblock the e6 pawn. Knight d2, e6, knight f3, rook e3, c2. Taking now the pawn would be a big mistake because of knight d4 and black gets the pawn. So after c2, Leela played bishop a3, and after b4, bishop b2. Knight h4, king now takes the pawn, king g8, rook e5, taking away f5 from the knight, king f8, and now rook e5. Now going to f5 with the knight would be a mistake because of this pin, so the knight goes to g2, bishop d4, threatening to trap the knight, but the even bigger threat is bishop c5. So Stockfish now plays king e7 to get some activity, and now instead of going for the knight, Leela takes on g7 because it's much more important to unblock these pawns. King d6, bishop h6, rook c8, king b1, king d5, rook e2, knight h4, e7, rook e8, bishop f8, knight f5, h6, these pawns are unstoppable, knight d4, and rook d2. And now Leela of course could win easily by giving up the rook for this knight and promoting these pawns. But as we know, Leela likes to complicate matters, and she gave up this rook and promoted one of the pawns to another rook, and then eventually promoted the other pawn to a knight, gave up her new rook, and then eventually mated with bishop and knight, the way she likes to do it. She's getting really experienced mating with bishop and knight. At the moment when I created this video, Stockfish was 1 point ahead, but they are basically neck and neck and fighting really hard. So let's see what happens next. Please subscribe, like and share, and check out some other videos. Thanks for watching and see you soon.